Welcome to your first lecture in statistics class. As I noted in the introduction to the class, this is going to be a very different sort of statistics classes than most statistics classes. I'm not going to teach you recipes for you to apply statistical formulas. It's going to be more along the lines of me wanting to present to you and teach you how to communicate evidence, analyze data, and also really importantly, communicate evidence, communicate data, and to do so doing the real sorts of things and use data in the real sorts of ways that people in politics do it, whether it's polling, whether it's media buying, or whether it's use of the voter file. But one excellent way, I think, to start things off is to give you a good idea about how evidence is used, how numbers are used, how evidence is presented, is to do a review of the 2016 presidential election. It's also a really good way for me to introduce to you what's going to be a core concept of this class, and what's really going to be a core concept of a lot of the classes and of the program in general is the concept of share and performance. And don't worry if you don't understand what that is, because I'm not even sure you want to count how many times you're going to hear me say that in this lecture and how many times you're going to hear me and others say this over the course of the program. So let's start with and let's jump into our exploration in statistics by looking at what happened in the 2016 election. Well, the first thing to say about the 2016 election is that it is not an election where lots of people who were pollsters and lots of people who use quantitative evidence and lots of people who model, or really lots of people who follow politics at all, got it particularly right.
Donald Trump has been saying that he will run for president as a Republican, which is surprising since I just assumed he was running as a joke.
So when you stand and deliver that State of the Union address, in no part of your mind or brain can you imagine Donald Trump standing up one day and delivering a State of the Union address?
Well, I can imagine it in a Saturday night skit.
We better be ready for the fact that he might be leading the Republican ticket.
Next, I know you don't believe that, but I want to go on.
A wide variety of pollsters, data aggregators, not to mention basically every single pundit out there, assumed with a pretty strong degree of certainty that Hillary Clinton would win the presidency.
And so, right now, Mr. Trump, to answer your call for political honesty, I just want to say, you're not going to be president, all right? It's been fun.
Donald Trump will never be elected president of the United States.
Donald Trump is a here today, gone tomorrow candidate for president of the United States.
It's to be a wake-up call to the Republican Party. Despite Boris thinking that Donald Trump could win New York, the presidential race is over.
I think that man will be president of the United States right about the time that spaceships come down filled with dinosaurs and red capes.
On that note, Tom,
take it from me. How about that?
The New York Times saying that Hillary Clinton has an 85% chance to win. If you notice, if you can see the small print there, that's a screenshot that was taken at 10:20 p.m. on election night. So that's not a screenshot that was taken a couple weeks before the election, or even a screenshot that was taken just as the polls were closing, but that's a screenshot that was taken after we had initial data in from a number of states. The New York Times still saying that Hillary Clinton had an 85% chance of winning. If you look at 538, a major aggregator of polls and a major modeler and data analyst of things, day before the election, they had Hillary Clinton with a little bit over a 3 in 4 chance, a 76.6% chance of winning. The upshot at the New York Times, on election night they had it at 85%, or at 10:20 on election night they had it at 85%. The day before they had it at 90%. The Real Clear Politics average of polls, or daily costs, had it at 96%. The Princeton estimator had Hillary Clinton's probability of winning at 99%, and the HuffPost had Hillary Clinton's probability of winning at 98%. Well, as we know, that is not what happened at all. And it's not only the case that these aggregators got the national numbers wrong. So overall, the polling averages had Hillary up by about 4 percentage points. And as we're going to discuss a little bit later in the class when we get to polling, some have claimed that the national polls actually weren't off by that much because Hillary Clinton did end up winning the popular vote by a little over 2 percentage points. But you also see that the polls in general and people who modeled off the polls and modeled what were going on in states also got the states very wrong. The supposed blue wall of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, 3 states that had gone for Democrats since 1988. In the case of Wisconsin, since 1984, all of them had Democratic win probabilities of over 80%. From all the pre-election prognosticators, and those are all states that Donald Trump ended up winning. So overall, there was this sense that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency, and there was a sense with a very high probability that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency. So I remember just after the 2016 election, I happened to be reading a book on the Yom Kippur War, the 1973 Yom Kippur War, and the book starts by painting a picture of what you would have seen if you were looking at a satellite picture of the Middle East, if you were looking at a satellite picture of Israel's border the day before Yom Kippur 1973. You would have seen thousands of Syrian battle tanks poised a couple miles from the border on the Golan Heights. You would have seen thousands of Egyptian battle tanks poised near the Suez Canal on the border between the Sinai and Egypt. And somehow, when people looked at that, both American military intelligence and the CIA, and certainly Israeli military intelligence and the Israeli Mossad, they somehow took those pictures as evidence that there was no way that the Arab armies were going to attack. Why did they do that? Well, there was something called the conception. So you can learn one word of Hebrew. It was called conceptia. And it was this conception by the entire military intelligence and Mossad intelligence establishment in Israel that there was absolutely no way that the Arab countries were going to engage in a major attack and a major war with Israel. The assumption was they were still licking their wounds from 1967, that they didn't have the logistical skill to pull off such a massive attack, that the Russians had signaled that they didn't want the Arabs to attack and weren't going to help them with the expertise and the supplies. So what happened is, in the 6 months leading up to the 1973 war, all these, what in retrospect were very clear signals that Egypt and Syria were preparing to go to war, were either ignored or were interpreted as evidence that they weren't going, because everyone assumed that there was no way they were going to go to war. So every single piece of evidence was interpreted through that filter. So for most folks in the media and most folks who follow politics, there was definitely a conceptia in 2016. Why was there this conception in 2016 that Hillary Clinton was going to win the presidency? Well, the first reason was that there were simply more Democrats than Republicans in this country, that the number of Democrats was growing, and that while Democrats did have some trouble in midterm election years, that Democratic turnout was likely to be much higher in a presidential election year. There was also the assumption, and we spoke about it a couple minutes ago, that there was a blue wall, that even if Clinton lost some states that Obama won, even if Clinton lost to Florida or lost in Ohio, that there were states in the Midwest, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, that were now so solidly Democratic. So there was this assumption that there was absolutely no way that Clinton could lose those 3 states, and if she won those 3 states along with the traditional Democratic states, that would get her over to 70. There was also a conception that Hillary was going to win with a very high probability because she had the same brilliant people that Barack Obama had working for him in 2008 and 2012 that Clinton had working for her in 2016. And the assumption was very much that Democrats in general and the Clinton campaign in particular were running a much more sophisticated campaign, doing a lot more of the sophisticated data science that modern campaigns were doing, and that many of them were pioneered by the 2008 and 2012 Obama campaigns. The other side of that coin was the assumption that Trump was barely waging a campaign, that Trump's campaign was just Trump tweeting and Trump traveling around, and that Trump simply didn't have the polling, analytical infrastructure and targeting infrastructure that a modern campaign would have. And then the last assumption was that Hillary Clinton would win because she was running against the weakest nominee ever in Donald Trump. Well, of course, what happened? It turned out that Hillary Clinton wasn't running against the worst nominee ever. It turned out that Hillary Clinton was running against the second weakest nominee ever. And of course, Hillary Clinton may have ended up, in retrospect, being the weakest nominee ever. Trump wins. Now, the fact that she wasn't running against the worst nominee ever or the weakest nominee ever and running against the second weakest nominee ever, you always have to cite your sources. So I took that from Barry Alvarez. So I was at University of Wisconsin for many years before I came to the University of San Francisco. Barry Alvarez was a longtime football coach at University of Wisconsin, and Wisconsin was playing in the Rose Bowl a number of years ago. Many of the sports pundits talked about how Wisconsin was the worst team to ever go to a Rose Bowl, and they ended up winning the game. And so Alvarez walked into the press conference afterwards and said that he guessed now that Wisconsin wasn't the worst team to ever play in a Rose Bowl, but must have been the second worst team to ever play in a Rose Bowl. So that's where I got that little soundbite from. So Donald Trump won. What happened? What's to learn from 2016? But also importantly, what's not to learn from 2016? And very importantly, for this class, what can we learn about how to use data, how to analyze data, how to present data, and how do presidential elections in general, and this presidential election in particular, illustrate the core concepts of share and performance, which are going to be crucial in this class, crucial in this program, and you're going to be learning a lot of the skills to estimate share and performance.